I'm back from vacation. I'm Nick Irwin. This is Beyond the Ballot, and we're back for another episode. This episode with Q Tito, abolitionist of Unshackled Liberty. This is an episode of his show, which I'm also putting up on my show. So if you haven't checked out Unshackled Liberty, go check it out now. Great podcast. Before we get started on this one, just want to announce the winner for the Keep Key crypto hardware wallet. This bad Larry right here. There you go. You can see that. For sharing the last episode with Jason Bassler. The winner is Alex Vogler. Congratulations, my dude. Thanks for sharing that episode. We might continue doing this. This is a giveaway sponsored by Voluntary Apothecary, who you know and love if you watch the show. Makers of excellent beard care products, among other things. So, yeah, thanks for sharing the show, Alex. I appreciate it. Enjoy your hardware wallet. Real quick before we get started, too, got to thank my Beyond the Ballot super supporters, Maxwell, Dave, Dennis, and Chuck. Also, the show is produced not only by myself, but by Dave Akins, Dennis Wiscount, and Chuck Smitley as well. Couldn't do it without you guys. If you want to support the show like they do, you can, of course, go to patreon.com/beyondtheballot. And you can always like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Interact in any way with the show on any social media. You'll hear in the show today the former name of the show, Enemy of the State's Dank Pod Stash, the page that I had going for about 2 years, 16,000 follows and likes, got taken down by Facebook. So find Beyond the Ballot at Beyond Ballot Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. That's pretty much the only place I have the show pages now are those places. But I also post anything and everything about the show from all of my accounts, and I am at Non-Voting Nick just about everywhere. So find me there, hit me up. And thanks for supporting the show. Enjoy the episode. Beyond the Ballot is officially sponsored by Project Sparta. Now's the time to get healthy and in shape. Greg Papanicholas is going to get you there with personalized meal plans, training, group support, and tons of amazing fitness and motivational resources and knowledge, including the Project Sparta Facebook group. You can go to projectspartacoaching.com and learn more about Greg's work and get started on your path to health. In this crazy world we're living in, our health is more important than ever. Get up, start learning, communicating, and training. One of the most important and often neglected things in life is your physical health. Get to projectspartacoaching.com now and get after it. Shout out to Voluntary Apothecary. Voluntary Apothecary is here to fulfill all of your beard care needs. They carry beard oil, mustache wax, beard butter, and more. I only use their beard care products, and I love them. You can check out their amazing products at voluntарyapothecary.com, and listeners of the show can take 10% off your order with code BEYOND at checkout.
Professional anarchists.
You guys are getting paid?
Yep, right on, dude. Hey, everybody. This is Q the Abolitionist, and as we discussed or as you heard in the intro, Crypto Gumbo is not joining us today, but we are. Well, I am having a conversation with non-voting Nick Irwin, and we just, this is a conversation, Nick, we wanted to have much earlier. In fact, I wanted to try and press this out before the election, but life happened.
Mm-hmm.
I had car trouble, I had a flat tire, and we had to cancel, and so now we're playing catch up. But it might be good to have this conversation now in light of everything that's going on with the election. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It's more evidence that voting is a sham.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, that's so I was a little disappointed at first, but then after watching how everything started to unfold and is continuing to unfold, it's like, well, as if we needed any more evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did you want to start out and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself? And I think now you're obviously a very successful podcast host yourself. You do Beyond the Ballot is the name of your podcast, right?
Yeah. I don't know about very successful, but thank you.
Well, we all are, man, right? Where this is, if you're doing this, it's successful, right?
Sure.
If you've decided to continue doing it in spite of, I don't know what your experience is like. Every week I have to remind my wife that this is a hobby.
Yeah.
And and she has to remind me that it's just a hobby. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So, but what's your background? What brought you to your position currently as you view voting? What brought you there?
Well, I've never voted in a presidential election. I don't think I've ever voted on anything. What kind of brought me to anarchy was just being a rebellious little shit growing up and not recognizing authority and kind of just questioning it more than anything, because I could understand when people had, my best interests in mind as far as parents and teachers and whatnot, but I never really got the idea of people telling other people what to do without good reason, the whole leader versus ruler kind of thing. And then high school and right out of high school, I played in a punk band that toured around Arizona and some other states. And when you're in the punk community, you see a lot of the anarchist symbols and imagery and whatnot, and that got me interested in anarchy. Not as far as, reading anarchist literature and whatnot, but, fuck the man, fuck the government, all that stuff. And so I ended up, oh, shoot, you might have to bleep that out. I forgot. I'm sorry. Screw the man, screw the government. And
I was going to say something.
I totally forgot.
I was going to say something as soon as you're done, but yeah, thanks for catching yourself.
I'll try not
that's
to.
All right, but that's all right.
But yeah, so after that, I didn't find a lot of people that were interested in anarchy, and I didn't know too much about it. And I kind of started reaching out on social media, and I started finding pages like Agorist Ball and Statism is Slavery and stuff like that. And that directed me towards more like-minded people and towards a lot of the literature out there. I was absolutely hooked as soon as I read Konkin. And that kind of brought me to here, and just reading more about how I was feeling about anarchy solidified my position. And I'm sure we'll get into examples of why I think voting is useless ultimately as we talk, but that's just solidified that for me.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's interesting that whole process that you went through. And it's kind of neat that you never have been actively involved in voting politics. That is neat. I come from like the kind of the different side of it. I was, for the better part of my adult life, I was a registered Republican, very active, right? And family grew up that way, right? And my parents are voters, and I'm I was a voter, and it wasn't until the 2016 election that I realized that perhaps maybe I needed to get away from the Republican Party altogether for obvious reasons, and became a partisan libertarian, right? And then after voting for Gary Johnson, just kind of took a step back and started paying attention to some other. They say that 6 months, right? 6 months from libertarian to anarchist, right? So mine was probably about that time, 6 to 9 months, and then I just realized that it's all kind of a scam, it just is, and it seems to me that it is a strange, what would we call that? Like a ceremonial kind of thing.
Sure.
I don't know if I'm looking for what word am I looking for, but it's I don't know, a strange practice of a strange religion.
Absolutely.
And, obviously that's not my original thought. So no, that's interesting. What are your views on it being violence? Have you heard that before? And I'm sure you have. I mean, there's a school of thought out there where voting is considered violent. And I wanted to know your position on that.
Yeah, I had an interesting opportunity to address that and some of the other things that people say voting is. The other day, someone asked a question, and so I was able to kind of consolidate my thoughts on that, because I don't really care what you call it, whether it's violence, useless, consent, whatever you want to call it, as long as you're thinking about why you don't want to do it. I land on that voting is useless. But as far as voting being violence, I don't think it's violence because the act itself is not violent, And the way that people justify saying that voting is violence is that you're asking other people to perpetuate violence based on what your want is, what you're voting for, what legislation you want. And it's like, yeah, you're asking them to, but you're not perpetuating any violence. And that kind of comes back into voting being consent, which comes back to the ritualistic element of it. I don't think it's necessarily consent either. I think that's pretty shaky. I get the argument, if you vote, you can't complain. Not if you don't vote, you can't complain, because if you don't vote, you're staying out of that process. You don't want to play the game. You don't want to accept the results. If voting is
I've
consent,
heard that quite
sure.
a bit also, people telling me that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think it's
I didn't mean to
violence
cut you off
straight up.
there.
No,
I
it's
know
all
we got
good.
a little bit of a delay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I've heard that too. People say, if you're voting or if you don't vote, you can't complain, which just seems silly to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my perspective is, you can do whatever you want, right? You can complain, not complain whether you vote or not. But from a rationale perspective, if you do vote, I feel like you do have less grounds to complain because you have actively participated in the system.
Mm-hmm.
You've actively consented to whatever the outcome of that election is, and just by your participation. Personally, I choose as a result of just observing everything in the last a few years anyway. I think it's the culmination of my life, but ultimately, it's come to a climax in the last few years. I just don't consent, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't consent to be governed anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And want to kind of do what I can to pull back, and it's always interesting when people, I don't know, from my point of view, when people talk about an election and we look at the amount of, I guess the numbers are still out for the 2020 presidential election, but in the 2016 presidential election, the way it breaks down is, both Trump and Hillary ended up with about 30-something% of the vote.
Right.
And, or I guess and then so just by that math alone, those of us who abstained, or those who did abstain, I guess I didn't abstain then, I voted for Gary Johnson, but those who did abstain from voting actually outnumbered,
mm-hmm.
The winner.
Yep.
And wondering, and this is all theoretical, because how do you bring all this together, I guess, without the state being involved anyway. But if they actively voted those who abstained from voting, as a principle, and the perspective is we're lazy, right? Those who participate in voting will look at guys like us who don't, and will assume that we are lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And when in actuality it's a principle. So if you take those who voted or didn't vote as a principle, and you apply that vote of none of the above to that position, who wins, right? Usually the none of the above vote wins.
Sure. Yeah, that's something that people say a lot is, if you're not doing your civic duty, you're not doing anything. And that's something I try to get people to understand, is that not voting isn't the only thing that's happening. If you're not voting, you're not wasting your time getting into those debates, literally taking hours of your life off of whatever else you're doing and going and standing in line voting, absentee ballot, whatever. It's not just not voting. You're doing other things in your life to make yourself and your community more free. And I would almost be on board with the people saying that those who aren't vote are lazy, if I knew anybody who just lived a completely statist lifestyle and then just didn't vote. It's like, I'm just not going to do it. Well, then you're just a lazy statist. But if you're not voting and you're building the second realm, you're engaging in agorism, you're homesteading, doing whatever you want to live your life outside of, statist constructs, then you're putting in more work by far than people who go check a box every 4 years or whenever another initiative comes up.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just kind of one piece, of course, to the overall person, right, is trying to find a way to live life outside of the state, either obviously through counter economics, like you're talking about with agorism, or or just trying to exist without influence on the government, or without influence from the government or our statist neighbors.
Sure.
And that's getting harder and harder to do. You're out there, you're pretty rural, right? In Eastern Washington, and those of us living in suburbia, man, it's darn near impossible. But you do the little things that you can,
Yeah.
So what would you say? And I'm sure you have these conversations often. I mean, I'm like the only guy in my family that I know who out of principle doesn't engage, and that's relatively new, right? I told you that. What would you say to somebody who is adamant that voting is necessary and must be done? What would your response to that be?
One of the things that I like to bring up, I have a pretty specific example I use, is up here in Eastern Washington. Most of the tax money and whatnot from Eastern Washington ends up going over to Western Washington to fund their roads, my roads and whatnot, and people don't like that a lot.
Yeah.
But if you look at the history of the income tax, and it's a great example if you lay the groundwork with where the money actually moves with voting. If you look at the history of the income tax in Washington state, I believe it's 85 years the people have voted against an income tax. And so right there, they'll say, well, there you go. People are getting what they want, and we're not paying an income tax because people are voting. I'm like, okay, now break that down and look at everything else you pay taxes on and how much higher it is than the places that do have an income tax, the things that you pay taxes on that other places don't. Like just to go out and hike or go out on a lake or anything like that out here in Washington, you have to buy a Discovery Pass, or you're looking at some sort of ticket or fine from park rangers and whatnot. And so they've hid the revenue that they think they're missing out on from an income tax in hundreds of other taxes and other ways of getting that revenue. And then just recently came out and said, well, it's been voted down for so long, this income tax proposal, that I think the next time it comes up, we're just going to do a closed door meeting of the Washington state legislatures overnight too. It was like a 2 or 3 a.m. meeting they wanted to do, and we'll just vote amongst ourselves on it and not give the vote to the people. And so the overall point in this conversation that I have had with people is you can vote as much as you want, but as soon as the state decides they don't agree, they want what you're voting against, whatever, they're going to find a way to do it, whether it's legal or not.
Well, I think we lost you in the last part of that. You said,
okay.
As soon as the state, you're talking about they were going into a closed door session around 2:00 in the morning, and then kind of everything started getting choppy after that. Can you restate what you were saying there?
Sure. Yeah. So they what they decided was that they would not even give the people an opportunity to vote on the income tax initiative and have a closed door meeting. And so the whole point of the conversation, which I have had before, is that you can vote against it for as long as you want, and win or lose, if the state decides they don't like the outcome, or they want the thing that you're voting against, or don't want the thing to happen that you're voting for, eventually they're going to do it anyways, one way or another, illegal or not, legal or not, doesn't matter.
Yep. The house always wins.
Exactly. Yep.
It's kind of that premise, right? The house always wins. You go to Vegas or Reno or whatever, and you might get over a little bit, but at the end of the day, very few people walk out of there a winner. Yeah. And when you're dealing with the state, it's a very similar situation, I think.
And one of the quickest one-liners for people that think voting, especially for a president, is so important. I unashamedly steal it from Bill Burr. He says, if Trump wins, what is he going to do? Come make me a sandwich? He's not putting food on my table. He's just sitting there thousands of miles away and not doing anything. I've literally asked people who think it's really important, is he going to come put groceries in your fridge? Is he going to come make you a sandwich, gas in your car? Is he going to do any of that? No, you're doing that. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. And the other thing is from a guy who's got this latent, I don't know. I still respect a lot of the things that the founders did, obviously. As I get farther into my voluntarism, I tend to lean more and more anti-federalist, of course. But going back to the Constitution, and I'm not a constitutionalist. When I'm saying this is, I say this more as a reference. People who vote in the presidential election and then really lose it over, who the president is going to be, and really just get all in on it, seem to forget that it's not supposed to, the president's not supposed to have that kind of authority anyway. And I mean, we're getting a little bit off topic as far as voting goes, but these are people who do not even, in general terms, understand the principles of their own constitution, right, and the principles of the co-equal branches of government, and how the power is supposed to be split evenly between three branches of government, and has all now that's basically been abdicated to the executive branch, and there's a lack of understanding that in my mind, voting necessarily, people will say it's a right, it's a duty, it's a civic duty, it's something you're supposed to be doing. And I would say probably more than anything else, if you are going to vote, and we're talking two guys that don't. I wish Gumbo was here, because Gumbo's a voter. We would have been able to point and laugh at him a little bit. But so I think more than voting being a civic duty is understanding how the system is supposed to work if you're participating in it willingly, right?
Sure.
How it is supposed to work and how it is broken currently, and instead of just voting because you feel like you have to, because you feel obligated to, causing you to cast an ignorant vote, we'll say, instead of, if you're going to vote defensively, vote back to the principles that you say you believe in as a practicing member of a consenting body of governed people. Am I saying that? It's being all chopped up in my head, but I don't know if people understand a lot of ways why, obviously vote. You're coming from the position. We're talking a little bit about voting, and I don't know if I completely derailed.
No, I get what you're saying.
It's as if they don't understand why they're voting. They vote because they have to, and they don't understand the principles that they're voting for.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. They get all riled up because it's an entertainment spectacle at this point, and it's highly emotionally fueled, whether it's the vote for the presidency or vote for, say, legalizing cannabis or anything else like that. And you hit a buzzword for me when you said voting in defense, because I don't think that exists. I constantly post this article that I wrote for the Counter Economist. I don't think it's a magazine anymore, but I wrote it for an e-zine called the Counter Economist. And I I like to make defensive voters within the libertarian and anarchist circles mad. So I titled it Why You're Wrong About Spooner and Defensive Voting. But people like to cite Spooner and defensive voting, saying that you're kind of caught there. It's a man with a gun, or you're forced to go onto a battlefield, is what Spooner said. And so you have the option to kill or die. And it's a false dichotomy. You can exist outside of that whole thing. You apply the same thing that you apply to the idea of voting for a president to voting for any other initiative. And if you actually look at why things like, back again to cannabis legalization or any of the drug legalization that's passed recently is not because people are voting on it. People have voted on this stuff for decades, and it didn't pass. It's a cultural change. It's a cultural shift. You have to shift the culture. And one of the most blatant examples of that is Hillary Clinton flip-flopping on the gay marriage issue. Once it became culturally acceptable, she embraced it. Before that, staunchly against it. People who got cannabis legalized in the places where it's legal now, for years had marches and get-togethers and smoked weed illegally in public and all this kind of stuff. It's a whole lot more than just voting for it or even voting defensively. It's changing an entire culture, changing your lifestyle, and changing the acceptance of it.
That was so wild for me when I was in high school. I was in high school in the 90s, right? And then we had, I didn't participate in it, but there was like sit-ins on the Capitol lawn. In Sacramento is where I'm from, right? So the state capital of California, on the Capitol lawn, where people were just sitting in and just doing that, just smoking cannabis. And I remember thinking to myself, obviously I didn't participate at all, and I wouldn't today either because I don't do that. But I mean, like, I remember thinking to myself, how are they not being? I'm a kid, right? Still, and how are they not being arrested? How's this not happening? And they weren't. It was just happening, like on the lawn, in the on state property, like right there on the state Capitol building lawn, front steps, like they're just smoking weed. And I don't even. I mean, you mentioned that, and I go back to that in my head. It's like that was so wild to me. How that even happened. And now, of course, and you're right, because there was already kind of cultural shift, in the mid 90s, and as I'm like 15, 16, 17 years old, whatever, in high school, and seeing this cultural shift, and then going into, I guess what are we 25 years later now, and California is like full recreational marijuana use and all this other stuff. But the difference is as far as I understand, for California, it's not really legal. I mean, it's not like legal, like you can go out and plant whatever flower you want in your garden legal. You know what I mean? Like, you got to have the license, and you got to have the tax stamp, and you got to have all this other stuff, and you have to have, they got to, everything else. As far as I understand, if you're a non-licensed distributor, you're going to get pinched.
Yeah.
And if you are purchasing from a non-licensed distributor, you're going to get pinched. So really, it was just another opportunity for the government to rake in some revenue. Is what it was.
It's the perfect example.
It's not really legal, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Well, it is really legal, because legalization is the perfect example of the backfire of defensive voting. Because people say, well, I'm voting so that I won't get thrown in jail for smoking a little pot, right? And it's like, okay, sure. So now you're not thrown in jail, but they're not releasing everybody. If you've ever looked at what it takes to get released from prison after these laws pass, and they're supposed to grant amnesty, clemency, whatever they call it, to nonviolent offenders, it's taken months and years. They're not getting out. Like you said, if you're distributing without a license, so you're not paying the state for it, if you're carrying over an ounce or two, depending on where you're at, you're going to get popped for it. You have to register plants up to a certain amount, and then you can't do it. There's all these hoops you still have to jump through. And like you said, it's a massive revenue generator for the state. It's only growing the state. It's not defending you from the state. The next best option would be decriminalization, but the best option would be it being off the books completely, which they're never going to allow that, especially
not even
voting.
mentioned. Not even It's like, you're just begging. You're begging for permission when you do that, and it takes the whole consent to the governed concept and throws it right out the window. Because if government was really based on the consent of the governed, you wouldn't have to vote on those things. They would just be.
Exactly.
It would just be, and there would be no whatever. Yeah. So it's a whole myth. It's all that. Man, I really wish Gumbo was here, because I'd love to point and laugh at him with you about that.
We can just point and laugh while he's not here, and he can watch it later. Gumbo.
I know. Yeah. So, dude, I don't know what else to talk about. So, tell me about you. What's going on? Tell me about your podcast.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just had a pretty massive blow to the podcasting, social media from Facebook, because previously, before it was Beyond the Ballot, it was Enemy of the State Stank Podstash. And just hearing that, I'm sure you can tell why I changed the name.
Yeah.
But that page had about 16,000 likes and follows. It was fluctuating. They were taking chunks of it. And then the other day, they unpublished it. So that's completely gone. And previous to that, they had not let me merge it with the new Beyond the Ballot page because of previous violations. So luckily, it didn't delete both pages through a merge, but I would still post episodes and memes and get a lot of reach on there, and that just got taken out from under me. And I'm also on a 30-day ban on my main, so I can't even get into the Beyond the Ballot social media that's run through Facebook. So that's what I'm dealing with, just running things from the sock account. And I had Aaron and Kingsley from Float on my show not long ago, And I'm really thinking about moving most of my content creation completely over to Float. It seems like a really, really great place to be for content creators, especially if you can bring your audience over there. So I'm in a weird transitional phase with that stuff, but other than that, it's going well. Have been having some good guests on.
Yeah, we're kind of
good reach, good stuff.
That's awesome. We're kind of in a transition too. We were on Anchor, and they decided that they were going to not let us run ads anymore, and really wouldn't tell us why. And I don't know if it's a financial thing for them, I mean, I'm not making a lot of money on this. Like I don't have like a huge reach. It's just more of like a hobby, like I was saying earlier.
Sure.
And, but so we decided to start self-hosting, and so Jeremiah Harding, and he's helped us build our website, unshackledliberty.com, and in the meantime, while we're trying to work all those bugs out, we moved everything over to Podbean, and so we're pushing everything through Podbean, and then as we build up our website, so yeah, I know what it's like to be in transition. Float, I've heard a lot about that. I need to check that out. Do they have like an app for your phone?
Yep, they have a beta app.
I
think you go to float.app and you'll download it. And this year is really 2021. They said is the year that they're really going to implement a lot of this stuff. But they've put something in place which is really nice if you're looking to leave Facebook. Is you can download your profile from Facebook onto Float and just seamless transition. But the cool thing, one of the things I'm really excited about, because my show is supported through Patreon exclusively. I've tried I don't know, there was a crypto option that was like Patreon and whatnot, and it didn't work out. People don't like to pay in crypto, but Float, you can do essentially the same kind of stuff as Patreon, a subscription service, but they don't take any fees from it. So you get 100% of the revenue that people pay you, which is amazing.
Well, that's cool, man. That's something to look into. So yeah, I'm always interested in these alternate social media sites and whatnot, because you have these near monopoly things with Facebook and Twitter and the like, and they just control a lot of the information that you see. So looking for places that you can go where it's not so controlled, but also, I mean, let's be honest, starting up a social media presence has got to be challenging when you're competing with, Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. And these guys are so powerful, and there's so many people on there. And part of the experience is the vast amount of different kinds of interaction that you get with all of the people that are on. I wouldn't know how that would go with these, with these alternate social media sites. I think probably though, what you're right on what you're doing is good is it's the content creators that got to get on there and bring their audience with them.
Exactly.
Right. Because if it's just a guy, just some dude that goes and sets up a thing and isn't a content creator, and nothing wrong with that at all. I'm barely a content creator, right? So, but some dude that goes on there and doesn't have a lot of a following, it's not like he's bringing people over with him to build the community, right? But if you get these heavy hitters, and maybe even some of these blue check marks on Twitter that could just kind of bring some of those people over with them. I'm not endorsing blue check marks necessarily, but you get the idea. These guys that have several thousand followers, so.
Places like YouTube are really messing things up. I don't know exactly what's going on, because I declined to turn on the monetization through YouTube because I didn't want extra ads besides what my sponsors playing on my videos. But I know a lot of people are kind of getting screwed over on YouTube through that monetization process, because they're really hitting people hard for copyright violations and whatnot. And I've noticed that in a lot of the game streamers and stuff. And I'm like, man, Aaron and Kingsley need to reach out to these guys and bring them over to Float and stream on Float and do this stuff. And so, blue check marks, anybody that's making any kind of content like that. And the other thing is you kind of got to be everywhere. I'm literally on everything I could find as non-voting Nick, even the Hunter Biden owned Parler. I'm there. I don't use it much. I need to do that more. And that's that's one thing that makes it a little harder. You almost need to hire someone to manage your social media to post things everywhere. I've been really bad about that, but I need to catch up on it.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I only really do Twitter. I do a little bit of Facebook. I should probably explode out a little bit more. Do a little bit more. You're right. I'll look into that. But well, anyway, dude. Yeah, like I said, I wish Gumbo was here because we could laugh at him. But what else did you want? Is there anything else you wanted to say about voting and break down some of the reasons why it's some more reasons why it's not advantageous or not a good idea?
Well, it's really just a complete waste of time. That's what I've settled on, and I really can't.
That's the biggest one.
I like people to try to poke holes in the arguments. So wherever you're listening on whoever's show, wherever in the comments and whatnot, poke holes and why it's useless or why it's not. But the way I see it is you're having all these awesome conversations, even though they may be about whatever candidate. That's not as awesome. But if you look at people voting about different initiatives, things that they want to pass, things they want to pay for, don't want to pay for, you have all these awesome conversations and debates leading up to one day where you stand in line or check a box and send it in the mail, and then it's just like, people are done talking about it. Yeah, continue those conversations and have those conversations every day with people and implement those things yourselves. It's very possible. Like you said, it's getting harder and harder to do that in an urban environment. I think it's a lot easier in a rural environment. But these are initiatives and things that you can do and change and not just let it go once you've checked a box and hope that it does or doesn't happen. You were talking about the slide towards more of a more federal controlled government. I know the word is used way too much now, fascism, but it's pretty darn close if you're looking at a hyper-powerful federal government controlling everything. I'm all for secession and balkanization, and I've talked about that a lot with my buddy William Gadsden on Think Liberty. And it's, there may have to be concessions made by anarchists in one form or another. I'm not sure how to kind of get behind those movements to start decentralizing things more, so that you have the opportunity to carve out your anarchist area. I think
if we have a way in to the status with what's going on right now with the presidential election, I think most of the statists who are paying attention, whether they're team red, team blue, or some other team color, right? I think they're starting to see why decentralization should benefit us as a whole, right? Like in the secession movement you were talking about, like I'm out here in Honolulu, right? I'm out all the way out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, like smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There's no reason why the solutions that are on the table in New York City would work necessarily out here in Honolulu.
Right.
And I've said it before, even on this island itself, like I'm on the island of Oahu, Honolulu is the city. But you have all this whole surrounding area, particularly on the North Shore, that is so very, I'll say rural. Rural is probably, it's beach.
Yeah.
It's beach rural. You know what I mean? It's like, like surfer beach rural, right? The things that you would do up on the North Shore would not work in town, and vice versa. The things in town would not work on the North Shore. I think people are starting to see that. And when you have a nation as diverse as ours, and ultimately the United States is not just one nation. Right. It's several nations. Like when you think about cultural, cultural values and things that work for this group. Being from California, the Chicano, Latin American group. And several, and I hate to say it, I don't want to lump everybody together, because even among that the Chicano groups, there's so many different languages and cultural nuances that white bread suburbia from Sacramento like me wouldn't even understand. Sure. Right. And then so that's like several nations right there just inside one state, just inside California, and then extrapolate that out across 51 states plus DC plus all the different territories. There's so many different nations here. Yeah. Decentralization is the only way to peacefully coexist with everybody. Exactly. And having I hope that sooner or later those statists that are so bent on their team winning just so they can be in power And there's that trigger word, power, at least for me. There's got to be some value in seeing that maybe a secession or secession light, diet secession.
Sure.
I don't know. You know what I mean? Something to kind of trend it in that direction of liberty and independence and freedom and real like decentralization.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, a lot of that stuff,
seems like when we vote, we pull away from that.
a lot of that stuff kind of took off during the Obama administration, because the right wing wanted to pull out because they didn't like the Obama legislation that was going on. And it became a little bit harder of an item for the left once Trump was elected in 2016. They started adopting the idea a little more. And then Civil War, the idea of Civil War started popping up towards the middle-ish of Trump's election. And this is the way to avoid that kind of thing.
That's absolutely. I was going to say that. Yeah. So that's like way down the line. That's when everything else has failed, and nobody wants that. That's your friends and mine. Maybe, I don't know. The guys that claim to be Boogaloo Boys and whatnot, and that's kind of a funny meme. I think people have taken it a little bit too far with a lot of that stuff. But you saw the spirit in that. And you being from Washington probably had a closer look at this. You saw a little bit of the spirit from the left with the Chapel Hill Autonomous Zone, right? Chaz. Now we can joke about the implementation, right? Like we all, I'm sure, have opinions on that, but the spirit was there to try and like bring something together that was a little less, outside of the centralized government, right? A little less, And again, the implementation. I'm not talking about details here. I'm talking about the spirit, right? So we saw a little bit of that, and I'm wondering how much of that, how long until we see more of that sort of spirit.
Well,
in certain areas,
it's interesting because I think we're already at the kind of start. We're kind of just cresting the hill of Civil War. I don't know that it's avoidable looking at other modern civil conflicts. And it's hard to call it a civil war, too, because a lot of people are stuck on the North versus South two-party dichotomy, and it's not that. There's a whole lot of different other stuff. If the U.S. was thrown into a civil war, I've talked ad nauseum about it on my show about how it could start. But what it would lead to would be balkanization and different political zones, in my opinion, where people would segregate based on how they want to live. And the difference with balkanization and secession being a possible way to avoid a civil conflict on that scale in the U.S., is that it would be more state-controlled and more government-controlled than, say, a balkanization movement, because it wouldn't necessarily be political zones. But the efforts have ramped up because we've wanted to see, or people in Texas have wanted to secede as a state. Washington wants to split. Parts of Oregon, Idaho, and Washington want to become Greater Idaho. Recently, Northern and Southern Illinois want to split. And the problem is you got to really look at the people who have been spearheading these movements to begin with, because the guy that was spearheading the movement here in Washington was an actual admitted white supremacist advocate for biblical law, like biblical law as in Old Testament, stone the gays and crucify people and stuff like that. Is not a person you want running a secession movement. But there's a lot to be learned from the people who have started it. And like Northern California, I love their flag. Their idea for a flag for a secession movement representing that double cross is great. And they're a perfect example of what's driving a lot of this. And it's the separation between the urban and the rural environments, and the blanket legislation between both areas. You got the urban environments taxing the people, specifically gas taxes, the same as they tax people that don't have to drive as far in the urban settings. They tax them the same in the rural settings, and it's a real mess. And that stuff needs to separate. And if there's going to be government, be governed separately.
Yeah. Yeah, and just as decentralized as it can get, and I'm glad you brought up the state of Jefferson, because I was just thinking about that. You're right. You've got parts of California that don't even want to be part of the the United States anymore, and then large parts of California within California that don't even want to be part of the state of California anymore. And I think you're right. That's kind of spreading more and more throughout the country.
Yeah.
Throughout the United States, and it should be interesting, right? So as we get into this, I had on last week. I talked to who was it? XRP Darren. I don't know if you're familiar with this stuff. His YouTube channel, Darren Moore Jr. And he's one of these XRP crypto guys. And we talked a little bit about the financial reset and wondering how that, if you have any insight on that, what the financial reset might do to further or advance or delay the secession and decentralization movements around the country. Just everything ends up being economic, right? At some point,
exactly.
And that we came on here to talk about. We came in here to talk about voting. So if you're not prepared to talk about that economic
I'll talk about
stuff,
everything,
I get it,
man.
I'm just as the conversation's rolling, I have no shortage of ill-informed opinions about everything. So we can talk about anything you want. But,
same here.
So I don't know, man. So the economics of what's going on with finances, with the banking system, with currency, and then of course the political impact of the social welfare, police state, nanny state, surveillance state. Leave me alone. No, I won't. Wear your mask. All that stuff, right? So,
well, you can sum it up in a couple of things.
There's a lot coming to a head, man.
I think, yeah, there is. But I think you can sum it up in a couple of things. But real quick before that, I got to shout out the Boogaloo Boys because I'm with the Boogaloo movement, despite them being deplatformed.
Yeah, good.
And the true Boogaloo movement, which is leave me alone. I just want to be left alone, not any of the other stuff behind it. And that's the majority of them. There's outliers, of course. But as far as the economic stuff goes, I think it can be summed up very easily in one meme, and that is money printer go burr. And we know money printer go burr is not a good way to run things. That's going to crash everything. And that leads into the second point where it's all economic and it all comes down to comfort. When it crashes and there's no infrastructure allowing supply of basic comforts for 24 to 48 hours, we're in it. That's when things are going to get wild.
Yeah. They say what full bellies don't revolt. So when those bellies get empty, that's when the discomfort comes in, and then people start making moves to take care of themselves, which is again why decentralization and secession is so important.
Yep.
And independence, getting independent, getting as much as you can off of the corporate food processing system.
Absolutely.
There's so many things we could talk about on that.
There's a ton.
Man. Yeah.
Well, it's the thing that's concerning is I've read an article with a statement by the guy. He's a doctor that would be like Biden's coronavirus czar or something like that. And man, was he interested in talking about how he could fix everything, including the economy, through more shutdowns and borrowing money from China for more payouts, for more stimulus and whatnot. I'm like, if you're looking to be a collapsitarian and you voted for Biden, you're going to get your wish, because that's what's going to happen. Dude. It's ridiculous. It's just I don't see it going well, whether it's Biden or Trump, though, because even Trump kowtowed to the demands and made the money printers keep printing. It doesn't really matter. That's the way they think it's going to work. It's Keynesian economics, and it doesn't work that way.
No, and there's a reset every so often, and this time around with the advent of a currency system that's completely different than anything we've seen in history. It's with cryptocurrency and whatnot. It's going to be interesting to see how it happens and what the impact of that is. And those of us, and I assume you just by talking to you, I assume that you've got your own crypto system. You got your own cryptocurrencies that your portfolio or whatever you want to call it. And we're not going to get into that. I don't want to, But those of us who are able to play like that, right? Who are maybe ahead of the game for a lot of the normies, we'll say normies out there. it's going to be interesting to see how this reset affects all of us differently.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. So
I like
I
privacy
don't know,
coins
dude. And
myself, and gold and silver.
yeah.
But I kind of see things going into an apocalyptic wasteland scenario in which it'll be harder to use crypto. And I know there are ways to do it. Shane Radcliffe over at the Vonu podcast, I think I don't know, it's over my head, but there's some way to transfer crypto using radio waves and having your own hardware wallets and stuff like that. I'm like, holy cow. If you can find people to trade with that want to do that, should the grid go down, more power to you. But I think, like you said, decentralization.
I feel like gold,
diversifying.
silver, yeah. That's been my biggest pushback on cryptocurrency. And, I'm like everybody else who's in it. I'm in it, but I'm cautiously optimistic. But, man, you have one electromagnetic pulse. You have one thing that knocks out the electric grid or something like that. And it doesn't matter how many Bitcoin you have, dude, because you can't get to it, and it doesn't exist anymore. And that's like the fatal flaw in my mind. And it might be perfectly fine in this part of the world over here,
sure,
but in your specific part of the world, where you've had a complete electrical grid shutdown and now nothing works.
Right.
It's India, dude. You know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's probably not, but it's some third world country that's unreliable,
Yeah.
And, might as well be back to the, Oregon Trail days. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
if you're going to rely on crypto, you really, and you're worried about that kind of stuff happening, or even just a solar flare, which does happen, you got to get a Faraday bag and a hardware wallet and throw it in there. And, you got to hit up my buddy Damon Land from Voluntary Apothecary and get a Keep Key crypto wallet, hardware wallet, that kind of stuff. It's small. I throw it right in a Faraday bag if you're worried about that. But like you said, decentralization. You have some crypto, you have some gold and silver, you got some greenbacks, you got some gold backs, you got whatever people are throwing at you. As long as I can spend it, I'll take it.
Yep, that's true. What's a good place to stop? What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, dude. Hey, so let's we kind of went all over the place, came to talk about voting. Of course, that's a very niche conversation, but I'm glad that we were able to expand that out into a couple of other things. I probably think we could probably draw this out a lot longer if we wanted to and talk about each little thing, but I don't know if you've got the time for it. I know I'm up against it a little bit, but man, I wish Gumbo was here for this. I think he would have enjoyed the conversation, added a lot to it as well. Let's take some time and let you talk about everything you're into. What types of projects you got going on with your podcast and everything else you feel like sharing.
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm at Beyond the Ballot, or at Beyond Ballot Pod on the Facebook Evil Network, at Non-Voting Nick. Anywhere else you want to find me, patreon.com/Beyond the Ballot. And so what I do is I have a weekly video and podcast that goes up, and I try to do also a weekly short video series that I call Beyond the Ballot Spotlight, where I spotlight people who are doing great things for liberty one way or the other. It doesn't happen every week. I got to get a lot more people coming in, so if you're doing something awesome, let me know and we'll bring you on there. I'd like to bring you and Gumbo on the main show. Whenever Gumbo's settled again, that'd be great. We'll have him on the show, but yeah, I just put out content, and I don't really talk about a lot that I do outside, off camera, because I do my thing. And I like to try to remain in the black
good.
and the gray market.
That's perfect. That's great. And that's why Gumbo and I use aliases, man, because we all have, we got lives, and there's it's like, it's okay for people to have differing opinions and whatnot, but the way things are now with cancel culture and whatnot, you start getting people that start beating up on people's source of income. That's not cool. So, well, man, thanks for coming on the show. And man, and for anybody listening here, listen to the Beyond the Ballot podcast. It's a good show. Thanks, I enjoy it. I listen to it myself, and it's one of my go-tos. So I look forward to every new episode you guys you put out, and I do enjoy the one that where you're spotlighting what people are doing outside of the mainstream stuff, man.
Sure,
that's great.
I appreciate it, man.
We need more of that, so keep it up.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great to come on. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, man. All right, buddy. Well, have a good one, man.
All right,
Take
you
it
too,
easy.
brother. Beyond the Ballot is sponsored by Project Sparta. Go to projectspartacoaching.com now to learn more and get on your path to health.
Professional anarchists.
You guys are getting paid?